Hey everyone, welcome to what is the first of hopefully a ongoing, potentially weekly series in which I'm sitting down here with David Persin and we are going to discuss Pokemon, life, whatever. So, people who don't know, David is the owner of the most complete English Pokemon card collection in the world. Good friend of mine. We've known each other for, I think, about 13, 14 years now, something crazy like that. So we just decided it was time for us both to sit down and just chat.
I don't really want to say anything, Dan. I really don't. I just want to sit here quietly and see what develops of our conversation. I have a couple of comments right off the bat. Number one is your screen was very nuanced, a lot of flack there. So I'm hoping you're a very handsome fellow. So I want to make sure that's not coming out in some kind of pixelation that's not supposed to be there. Number two, Dan, I think it's what?
I'm using a not perfect webcam this time around. I need to get my main camera set up for this kind of thing in the future, but hopefully the local recording at my end is still going to be okay.
Okay, good, good. As far as my voice, I'd like to just explain to everybody because I think they need to know. I coach every Saturday. I basketball coach, and so when I get on a Sunday and I've yelled the entire Saturday, really, it's just lucky I can speak at all. So thank you for listening to my rasp. Dana, it's been great to know you. I appreciate it. I know the last time you were here with me in Vegas, it was a lot nicer for me than it was for you. Because I know you lost quite a bit at the tables. But I'm glad that you're over that now, and hopefully, you and Laura are getting back to financial stability again. So good to see you, buddy.
Oh, we're financially unstable, but not because of blackjack tables. It's because of Pokemon.
Okay, well that makes a lot of sense. I'm
Yeah,
having
that's
some
why we're
issues.
financially unstable.
Yes, yeah, and I have that conversation pretty much once a day with my wife, so we're on the same page there, buddy. That's why we do bond
Yeah,
with the commonality.
yeah, that is everything that it is.
So thank you for having me. I'm calling this Coffee Talk, Koffee. It's our first episode of Coffee Talk, and hopefully it'll be an ongoing, special series where we can, just chat. I think it's chat and Pokemon and good stuff like that. So nice to see you.
Yeah, it's basically a podcast, but it's going on YouTube, so there are also visuals. But
Yeah,
you can
Dan,
listen
I don't
to it.
know. Dan, I don't know what a podcast is, what YouTube is, or any of that is. So I
Yeah.
just know a few Pokemon characters, and I'll leave it at that. So
So, for everyone out there, one of the main reasons we decided to do something like this is because while David owns almost every English Pokemon card ever printed, he really has no idea what he has. He just knows that when someone tells him he needs something, he goes and buys it, and then asks me later what it is. So this is also going to be kind of a nice little catch up for Dave to try and figure out what he's missing or what he has. So we'll be talking about a lot of that over these chats.
well, thank you for that immediate passive aggressive comment. I appreciate that. That's nice. I can't deny it. I do have to say that people really find it amazing how little I know about my own collection. The one thing I do know is something popped up in maybe like a Facebook chat or some kind of article the other week. And it said that there were these two folks, maybe two brothers from out of the country, and they had the Guinness Book of World Records most number of cards, English ever. So I think, Dan, we have to get on that a little bit and really work towards nullifying their recent award. I don't want to take away their celebration. I think it was, well deserved for the moment, but I think we should probably get that corrected.
I mean, I think it just goes to prove that, a Guinness World Record is just set by the people who will pay Guinness to set their world record.
Fair enough. Fair enough. You may be right. So
A lot of it is just go to Guinness and you apply and say, I think I have this record. And then they'll say, okay, send us $1,000 and we'll come and check it for you. And they check it for you. And if they don't go and verify it, really, they just go, okay, yes, you have everything you say you have. So, yeah, I mean, maybe we could probably get that figured out. We have to just check that the record is, most unique, most different cards as opposed to them just saying they have 100 copies of whatever.
no, that's exactly what it was. So that's why I knew that this, will be the down the road. We'll attack that at some point as well.
All right, we'll put them in their rightful place at some point.
Perfect, perfect. So I know one of the reasons, we've got so much we have to talk about, but I know one of the reasons that I was interested in at least today's topic is I have to deal with insuring my collection. And I've done that for a long time, but I've done that in a very minimal way. I've always said I had a couple of $100,000 just to make sure I had some leeway in case something were to happen, and that's called blanket insurance.
Yeah.
And they've always encouraged me to schedule my items, which is a concept of actually listing individually items and their values, because it's actually cheaper to insure them for those when those individual items are specified. Because the insurance company says, hey, now we know exactly what it is we're insuring, and we know how you're protecting it, and hopefully we're all safer in that manner. So I was surprised to find out. I just picked a number and I said, why don't we go with a couple of $1,000,000? Hi, how are you, sweetie? Yeah, I'm doing a podcast. I'm told it's a podcast anyway. So this is Luca. Luca would just pop in every once in a while to say hello. So I was told that to move from 200,000, which was a couple of $100 a year, to like 2 million, which was like $1,700 a year. I just asked for an idea of blanket coverage, and not worried necessarily about the amount. And so from there, I started thinking, what would I schedule? What would be the most valuable items in my collection? Of course, realizing that I only had an idea of a handful, and that's where you come in.
Yeah. So, as I'm sure you know, I'm good on the information. The value stuff is sometimes up in the air. The value stuff is also not my strong point, even when I know it, but we'll give it a go. We'll talk through some of your stuff and try and figure out where this should be going.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And I had some general conceptual things to discuss about that as
Yeah.
well. So we can kind of go from there. So maybe let's talk about some categories first. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, realizing, just to kind of give us some framework for discussion. So, number one, scheduling involves actual individual items. So I really can't say to you a set. I can't say the base first edition set,
Yeah.
because we would look at scheduling the Charizard, but we wouldn't necessarily look at scheduling the set.
Right.
But when it comes to categories, let's talk about the ones that come to mind most frequently with this collection. There's sealed booster boxes. There is complete sets. There is champion stamped cards. There is finalist stamped cards from Worlds as
Yeah.
well. There are all of the semifinalists, quarterfinalists, those cards as well. And there are the trophy cards, the number 1, 2, 3, and 4 trophy cards, depending on the years, going through the years. And then obviously, in addition to that, there are a handful of promotional cards. I call them promotional cards, or variant
Yeah.
cards, or whatever you'd call them, that may be of significant value as well.
Yeah. There's always going to be a couple of the promos which don't really fall into the other categories are going to be a lot higher than some of the others.
Right, right. And so the only ones, so the first thing I think we would agree on would be the first edition base box, right?
Yeah.
Which we've seen go. I mean, I see it out there right now for like 300. I'm not sure what that's about, because almost everybody's about 400. That's around with a box like that. But that gives us an idea. I mean, clearly that's the number one value item. No, you know what? Isn't that interesting? There's no clearlies. There is no
Yeah. I
clearly.
don't. I don't think there's a clearly because there's. I mean, there's some stuff you have where it's just so hard to put a value on it. Like I
Yes,
think if you went to sell, say, the 2004 number one trophy card, with that
right.
being the first number one, I mean, who knows where that ends up?
Yes, and only three of those, of course, in existence,
Yeah.
and two, and all three originally went to Japan before
Yeah.
I was able to finagle one out of Japan years and years later.
And I
So
believe the other two are still both with the original winners of that one. So it's
yes,
Yamato and Yaneda, I believe, are the two winners who still have theirs.
yeah. So again, you're right. I tend to think in this black and white, but right now
Yeah.
there's so much of this that's a little bit gray, as well as we would say the pre-release Raichu. That
Yeah, that's
again,
just one where you it's got to be the right person, and it has to be someone who's willing to, believe the provenance and follow the chain of events of who it went to before it came to you. It has to be someone who's willing to go through all of that to be wanting to buy it. But then it again just comes down to how many of those people want it right now, and what are they going to pay. There's the last sales data we have on that card is from when you bought it in 2009. And as we know, I mean, Pokemon is so different to what it was in 2019, never mind 2009.
Well, remember, of course, that I will add on to what you're saying because I certainly agree with it all. But I think the provenance piece is a lot more, it's a lot less controversial in the sense of so many people through the years, as you're well aware, told me the trophy cards would never be worth anything, and that the prototype, single, cuts and one-offs and all those things. And yet, as time goes on and this franchise continues to develop and be as big as it is, you have people who are interested in owning these 1, 2, and 3s,
Yeah,
meaning quantities of something. And so I don't, whereas in the beginning, I really had no confidence about what I was doing and what I was owning. And some of the larger players who shall remain nameless at this point in time, but anybody can contact me privately, and told me they would never be worth a thing. These trophy cards are now worth quite a bit,
yeah,
at least enough to be scheduled. And I don't really harbor any notion. I've had people come privately and offer me, several $100,000 for the pre-release. So I
yeah,
really believe that it's not going to be an issue. It's just a matter of what it would eventually
yeah.
be
I mean,
valued at if one ever came to market, is what I'm saying.
yeah. The main thing is if you ever put it up for like an auction or something, it's whether there's one, two, or 10 people who are wanting it. I'm not
Right.
I'm not saying it's going to go for nothing. I'm saying if there's one or two people fighting over it, compared to if there's 10 people with this kind of money who are all fighting for it, who knows where it goes. It's one of those things that's why it's so hard to do the numbers for the insurance and stuff, because there's just nothing on it. At least with the trophy cards, we can kind of say obviously the 2004 number one hasn't sold basically ever since you bought it from the winner, but some trophies from other years have sold, some recently, and you can kind of extrapolate the data and say, well, this one sold for, if this one sold for like 80 to 100,000, this one is the same type of card but has more desirability for being the first year. So you can kind of move from that. The pre-release Raichu is just so unlike anything else in Pokemon, where there's just nothing we can say, oh, this other card sold for this, so we can make this kind of leap to this one. That one is just unless you actually put it up for auction, who knows what it's going for? Is it going for that couple of 100,000? Is it going for close to 1 million? It's all comes down to who wants to spend what.
Right. Right. No, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, there's unknowns in all of this. I think from a scheduling
Yeah,
perspective, I have to make sure that I value something either at market if it's known, or at something that I believe I would be happy enough to receive
yeah,
in a compensatory payment if that item were actually damaged or destroyed
yeah.
or stolen or something like that.
I'm sure with scheduling that the insurance would at least take it if you showed, I've had this cash offer on it. They would
Yes.
take that sort of thing into account at least.
Right. Right. Um, so let's talk about trophy cards, because I think that this is where your expertise will, prove valuable. So
Hopefully,
here's yeah, I'd like to take a flyer on that at least, Dan. You know what I mean? On your
yeah,
expertise. Just kidding, Dan. Okay, so here's the thing. If you have the early trophy cards, which are considered not to be as pretty or as full art as the later ones, and
yeah,
you can discuss when that switch happened. But then again, those early ones, there's only a quantity of 3 typically of them,
yeah,
versus 6 later on. And then you couple both of those variables with certain years where maybe certain trophy cards were given more to the US and other easier to obtain country folk, as
Yeah.
opposed to when they go to Japan and so few ever really come back, and other countries as well. So how do we, and I guess the last variable would be just some of the previous auctions, like a 2006 number two. I remember somebody showing me it went for 110,000 at one point
Yeah.
at auction. So how do we balance all of those four variables at least to try to determine if we were going to put something up, what it would really sell for? Which are the more valuable ones? Which are the less valuable ones?
Well, I think we do have to balance it just based mainly on what those previous auctions went for. So that number two went for 110. The next number two to hit auction, it originally went for a little bit less than that. I think it ended somewhere around 80,000 maybe, but then that was around the time where PWCC got kicked off eBay. So I know that that auction never actually got paid for, and then they re-auctioned it privately. So it again went for a little bit less because there were less people looking at the PWCC website compared to their eBay. So I think for that number two, probably between the two prices is a good place to look at the market value, and that one was a half art number two as well. So the original variant of the card before they moved to the full arts. And I think you just have to look at probably the older years. The older it gets, the more people would want it, and the higher placing. So people would be wanting the one over the two over the three. With the half art, the four is an exception because the four only had 1 year in half art. So that's a bit different. And then the older ones, people will generally want a little bit more. I don't think there's a huge gap between anything other than 2004 and the rest, because 2004 has a much higher provenance of this is the first one. And then, people might want, say, an '06 over an '07 a little bit more, but on that, I think it's a lot closer and maybe just comes down to the person's preference, because other than you, no one is trying to go for all of them. No one is trying to say, I want every single year. People are saying, I want a 1, a 2, a 3, and a 4. And if they can get matching years, great. But again, a lot of people know that that's not realistic, so we'll just go for whatever it is that they can get.
And do you think when people are going in now again, I've always felt the way that you felt, and we've discussed this before, that people are going for a 1, 2, and 3 and 4 because it's not easy or obtainable to really get them all. But do
Yeah.
you think that that extends to 1, 2, 3, 4 half art, 1, 2, 3, 4 full art, 1, 2, 3, 4 combo art? What do you think?
I think people will either try, first of all, for half art or full art, and they'll try and finish that one. And then if they get the set of whichever one they've got, they'll then try and get the other one as well. But for half art, I think a lot of people are more okay with the idea that they would have to stick to 1, 2, 3, since there are only 6 copies total of the 4 in half art. So anyone who's going for the half art trophies, I think are a lot more okay with sticking with 1, 2, 3. I don't think anyone is trying to do 1, 2, 3, 4 combo between the two. I think they'll either stick to full art or to half art. And then I say if they finish that, potentially move to the other one, but they'll focus on one first. And normally it's people focusing on the full art at the moment just because they're more available than the half art. So the chances of them getting one trophy card in full art is a lot higher than them getting one in half art, and then they build out from there.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. I think something that's so interesting that I've realized over this last 12 months or so, as I've watched the markets, it seems that so many of these people who have discussed their desire to own a full set of trophy cards, like we're talking about a 1, 2, 3, and 4 or whatever, and they've claimed that they want them for their collections. Now those cards are going out to markets, and they are quickly being sold or tried to be sold, probably because I would guess that the greed factor has set in. I don't mean that in a negative way at all. I'm not using greed in a bad way. I think there was a famous movie, Greed is Good. I just mean that the potential profitability of turning around and getting those cards back on the market. I have seen no less than 4 individuals who have taken their cards that were supposedly for 1, 2, 3, 4 collections they were trying to get, and that were supposedly being obtained for a private collection, which is a way that a lot of people try to use or disguise their desire to just get the cards into their hands, are now back out on the markets or have been sold since then.
I think there's kind of two real factors that play into that. One is, of course, just the price increases, where, like, when I bought my 1, 2, 3, 4 set, they were a couple of $1,000s each.
Stop bragging, Dan.
Hey, I know what you paid for some of yours as well. Like, let's.
Okay, fair enough. Right back at me.
Yeah, so now I have at the point where I have them, and it's like, before it was like, okay, I got those, and it's like, if I sold them at the price I bought them for, it's like, okay, I'd get like $12,000 back. I've openly put these prices out there before. My 1, 2, 3, 4 set cost me around $12,000. If I sold them at that now, like, $12,000 is going to be nice to me. We do something nice with it, but it's not life-changing money. Those cards now, though, if I sold them at market value, is actually life-changing money. If I sold the cards for what I know I could get for them, I pay off my mortgage, I pay off my car, I pay off the solar panels. We have everything in our life sorted, and we have a ton of money left over. So I think that's just a huge thing for a lot of people, is they bought them, say, thinking, I could have this amount of money. I am okay with this amount of money being in these cards in my collection. And then suddenly it's not that amount of money anymore. It's twice, 3, 10 times that amount of money. And it just takes over to where people are like, I can't justify doing this anymore. The things I could do with that money are so much more. So I think a lot of people do sell them then. And I think the other factor is, for a lot of people who are collecting, especially now, people consider a collection goal complete once they have the items and once they have that collection done. And then going forward, they don't see that as a goal anymore, because that goal has been done. It's not about keeping the cards, it's about the fact that you did it in the first place. So people will probably get the 1, 2, 3, 4 and think, okay, that goal is done. I have achieved that goal. I have owned a 1, 2, 3, 4 set. And then we'll move it on because they have another goal in mind. And it's more about the chase of the cards for those people, rather than about actually owning the cards long term. So they chase the 1, 2, 3, 4 because they're fueled by the chase. They're fueled by the desire to get those and the challenge. And then once they complete that challenge, they move them on so that they can go chase another challenge. They set another goal in Pokemon. They go for something else. So I think it's a combination of those two factors is, I think, why people will say they're getting them for a personal collection, and then they will eventually hit the market again.
So what you're telling me is you're trying to imply underneath the surface of your commentary that it's time for me to liquidate my collection because I've achieved it. Is that what you're saying, Dan?
No, you're still missing a few.
Okay, fair enough. I guess my goal is more grandiose. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're still missing a few things. We got to get you those, but...
Well, so if anybody's out there right now, we should tell them I need the 2022 number
3. You still need.
I feel like it's number. Is it number 3? It is number 3. Yes.
Number 3. Yeah.
Why do I question you? So, yes. So just let's make sure we can put that out there, just so folks can keep their eyes open for
it.
Okay.
That's the last trophy. And anyone who was at EUIC, which, as we are recording, just finished, there'll be a champion stamped Ultra Ball that Dave will need at some point. So if you know Alex Szymanski or any of the other winners, comment here, message me, message Dave. We'll figure that one out.
Thank you for that, Dan. Champion and top 8, right?
There'll be champion, top 8, staff, and player. But It's always worth trying to chase the champion first, and then go for the others a bit later.
Yeah, good. So yeah, good. I appreciate the education on the half arts, the full arts. I think it's really interesting to see the escalation in value. And, I think it's really, the change that I've noticed over the years is people started realizing these cards existed, because I never even knew they existed for several years. And so now that you don't see them.
The first worlds, especially, I think no one knew. I remember reading online, I think I spoke to Chris Fulop directly about this, that after the first Worlds, you bought his Finalist stamped card from him, but you didn't even know that there was a card above that, and
Correct.
it wasn't until, so I think it would have been late 2005, early 2006. Jeremy Marin put his number one trainer on eBay, and that's when you and a lot of other people finally realized, oh, there's something even more than these trophies, because with World 2004, all the number ones and all the number threes went back to Japan, and all the number twos stayed in the US, but none of the three players did anything with them. I'm assuming because at that point, they had no idea what sort of value they had, if they had any value, because it was the first time they'd been given out. There's nothing to compare it to. And then it wasn't until Jeremy put his on eBay like 18 months after the first World, so like 6 months after he won his, that people actually started to take notice and realize, oh, these are even a thing. Like, these exist now.
Yeah, I learned that lesson financially very painfully. So, and
Yeah,
that's okay. Looking back, I'm still happy to have learned the lesson. But
yeah.
yeah,
You're still
that's
ahead.
yeah, I'm still ahead, and so I think that that's number one, is the realization of the cards, and number two is just the quantities. You always hear these conversations about the illustrators and whatever, and there's 39 copies, and you hear all these things. No one really knows exactly the number of really anything, in my
Yeah,
opinion. A
yeah,
lot of it's still speculation, if it's of any card that's speculated about. Of course, anybody that wants to gain more value will suggest that there's lesser than more. But ultimately, the world's cards, when you look at the suggested number, is 3 or 6.
yeah.
So just quantities of cards and not test issue cards or something are I
Oh,
think another reason why
extra copies that walked
yes,
out of Pokemon in
yes, yeah, yeah.
in ways. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about what other cards do I have that you know of that are, like I would suggest, like the Lucky Stadium, for example. Um,
Yeah, you have
those
the
kinds of cards that are in the collection that I really may not realize in a master set buried somewhere, or something that I should be thinking about.
Yeah, so the ninth Lucky Stadium is a big one. So for people who don't know, the Lucky Stadiums were a promo set in Japan, and there were different tournaments around Japan. Whichever one you went to, you got a different copy of Lucky Stadium. Now, Dave's collection, being English, didn't really care about those, but there was a Lucky Stadium released at the Tropical Mega Battle, which was in Hawaii, and it's one of a few bilingual cards. So it has the Japanese text on it, but it also has the English text on it. There should be a photo of it on your screen right now if you're watching the video form. I should have that sorted. Um, but that's one that Dave picked up because it does have English text on it as well. And that one is a very, very rare one. I think it was supposed to be 42, I think, is the number of players that were there, and each player got one copy. So that's one of those ones as well that hits Japanese collectors and hits English collectors, of which there are very, very few cards that do that, where people want both. So that's what that one is, and yeah, that one definitely should be listed individually on your insurance, because that one is a very, very sought after card.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, Other ones as well, since we're talking about Tropical Mega Battles, the English Versus set, which came out, that one is going to be a strange one, because I don't know if every card individually would hit whatever like minimum threshold you need, like depending on what your threshold is to be listing them individually. But
Right.
as a set, it's an incredible thing. Like, we knew for a while that a couple of sets sold complete ever, but then more recently we've seen sets broken up and people owning one or two cards from sets. Part of that is with finding out that there were two different versions of the set where one of the cards has an error. So there were a lot of people, I know yourself included, had one set, and, well, I say a lot of people, a small handful of people had one set and didn't want to try and get another full set. They just wanted the other version of the Mantine, whether it had the psychic weakness or the fighting weakness. So that caused a lot of sets to be broken up and the cards to sell individually. And the most valuable cards from that set are definitely the Mantines, because there's half as many of each, because they were in both sets, but they were different, obviously. So every other card has twice as many as each version of the Mantine. And then the Tropical Breeze card, which is in there, is kind of the precursor to the world's promo cards. in Japan, the big tournaments had Tropical Wind cards for a few other tournaments leading up to that one, and then Worlds starting in '04 had Tropical Winds, Tropical Tidal Waves, later on Tropical Beach and Champions Festival. But that one slots in nicely kind of between the two. So there's a lot of people who really want that one, even if they don't care about the rest of the set. So the Tropical Breeze and the two Mantines should definitely be, individually listed. But the rest of the set probably will land in that bracket too. I know there's a big auction going on at some point later this month where I think a near complete set is being auctioned, but it's being auctioned one card at a time. It's not being auctioned as the set that it is. It's being auctioned, so we might know values a little bit better later on this month.
Yeah, and there actually is a set out in auction right now that's got a current bid of 50,000 for the complete set.
I didn't realize it was a complete set. That's cool.
Yeah, and very high graded complete set as well. And I anticipate it will go certainly much more than that by the time it finishes. It finishes about a week from now or so. So, okay. Tell me about the Stadium Challenge card or something.
Stadium Challenge Deoxys, yeah. That one's it's just a variant from a set, so you probably have it just in your EX Deoxys binder set, because it's a card from a set which just has a symbol on it, but it has the original, set number, set symbol, that sort of thing. So the reason the Deoxys is so rare is that, as I'm sure a lot of people know, when Pokemon do tournaments, they do cards, and they'll often print the logo of that tournament onto the card. So back in the day, we had city championships, state championships, nationals. Now we have stuff like I said, EUIC, which happened this weekend, the internationals or intercontinentals, whatever they call them. The Ultra Ball from this weekend will have the internationals logo on it, and it'll say Europe on this one weekend, so you know which tournament it came from. Stadium Challenge Deoxys is a similar thing, but they didn't run very many Stadium Challenges. Stadium Challenge was a very, very short-lived type of tournament. They only ran it for 2 seasons. The 2004 to 2005 season was a Metang promo. And people know about that one a lot more for 2 reasons. One, because there were a lot more tournaments, and there were some in the US. So even though there's not a huge amount of the cards out there, the Metangs are still pretty available. You can still get them, so people see them. And also, the Metang was a Black Star promo, and it wasn't released without a Stadium Challenge version. So people collecting the Black Star promos would see, there's a gap in my set. There's a number I'm missing. I need to go look and research what that number is. But the Deoxys was a lot rarer, and obviously being a variant from a set, doesn't have that, that trigger for people to go, there is something missing here, because you wouldn't know. It's just a variant. But the season that was given out in, the 2005 season, they only ran one Stadium Challenge, and it was in Austria. So it wasn't a big event. If people go to Pokemon events now, they go to regionals, they go to internationals, they see thousands and thousands of people at these events. The Stadium Challenge that had the Deoxys at it had about 100 players total. So you would expect about 100 copies. But if you troll back through forum posts from back in the day, actually, I have a video about the Stadium Challenge Deoxys on my channel. I think it's the autoplay one on my channel, which goes into this in a lot more detail. But basically, the organizers of the event didn't get enough Stadium Challenge Deoxys to give out to all of the players. They said they only had enough to give out to about half of the players, and the other half received the regionals version of the same card. It's the same Deoxys from the same set, but it has the regionals logo instead of the Stadium Challenge. That one is super common because they ran regionals all over the world and ran a lot of them. So it is estimated to be 50 copies of the Stadium Challenge Deoxys were given out. And it did fly under the radar for a while because, like I say, people just didn't know about it. People weren't that interested, being that it was just, a card from a set with a logo on it. But that card, a few years back, really, really seemed to ramp up in popularity, and there were a couple of big, big auctions that ended at high prices for that card.
Wow, that's amazing. It's nice to hear when there is the estimates that maybe are sort of more credible, right? Just because of these stories and provenance behind them. So
yeah, I mean, to be honest, if the Stadium Challenge had 100 people and they said, we had enough for everyone, you probably wouldn't even think 100. You'd think, they probably got 200 or 300 and they gave one out to everyone, and then the staff had loads extra or whatever. But the fact that they said, no, none of the staff got these because they didn't have enough and only around half the players had enough, then it makes it seem a lot more credible as that small number than if they just said, oh, we had enough for everyone. Because once you have enough for everyone, it can be any number above the 100 players, basically.
All right, let's move on. What do you think about? I'm in random thinking mode. How about the trainer deck A?
Oh, the eight.
Since
Yes.
B is, I can see B's out there, and maybe they're around 10,000 or something like that, give or take. But you don't see many A's anymore. And I know there was a surge a year and a half, 2 years ago, and I couldn't find any completed listings or anything. So, what do you think about the A's and the quantities, or any idea of value at all?
Value, I couldn't tell you. All I would say is considerably more than the B, because especially the sealed ones, because the story basically is with the A's and B's were made to go out to leagues. People don't know what these are. These are decks that were made specifically to be sent to Pokemon leagues to teach people how to play. They're cards from base set, but they have a red border on the back, and it'll say Trainer Deck A or Trainer Deck B to make them not tournament legal. And Trainer Deck A has a base set Machamp in it, which is non-hollow instead of hollow. B has a Blastoise. So the A's, for the most part, did all get sent out to these leagues. They were played with, they were all used to teach people how to play. The B's, it seems like the majority of them, either none got sent out to leagues or only a few did. And then I think it was around 2008 to 2010, sometime in that time space, just some storage locker or some shipping crate or something is opened that has all of these Trainer Deck Bs that were never sent out to leagues. So for a while, a sealed Trainer Deck B was $100, and you could buy as many of them as you wanted because there were a few people who found this shipping crate or found whatever had just as many copies as everyone needed. Now, obviously, the market's dried up, and a lot of those were opened, so the sealed ones have gone down in quantity a little bit, but for the most part, at least, the Bs were sold to collectors as sealed for a lot of the population of the Bs, whereas the As, almost all of them, if not all of them, were sent out to leagues, so not many leagues kept them sealed, and if there were, a small amount held back, and, some others did get out from Wizards of the Coast, however, it was a small portion, it was a small percentage of how many As there are total compared to how many Bs there are total and the percentage of that were given out sealed. So the A's sealed, it is just going to be if someone ever decides to sell one. It's going to be another one like that where all we can say is it's got to be considerably more than the Bs, probably many, many times as much of the Bs. I know that a few people did open A's to try and get high grades on, especially the Machamp. I know a lot of people were chasing high grades on that. I don't think anyone's opened an A anytime recently, and I really wouldn't recommend them to. But I know that a few people did open some of the last few remaining sealed copies. But it's another one where it's got a cool, interesting story, and none have sold in years.
Yeah, yeah. I remember selling one, but it was years ago that I sold one, and
Yeah,
and I think back then it was somewhere around 10,000 or so. So probably 3 years or so. So it's just
yeah.
interesting to speculate on the value to put on
At the
it.
time that the Bs were around the $100-200 mark, I think even then the As were pushing 1,000, 2,000.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, at the time, 1 to 2,000 for any Pokemon item was so crazy. Like, there were a handful of items that went even close to that.
All right, another one for you. So there was I don't know the gentleman's name. You will, but it was the celebration at Worlds or something one year of a 60th
Oh,
birthday.
Ishihara's GX.
Ishihara. Okay.
Ishihara GX, the
Yeah.
Ishihara's birthday card, yeah.
So maybe talk about that a little bit, and
Yeah, so
I
that
mean,
one,
I would think I would. I haven't seen one of those for a while, so I would think I should be scheduling something like that as well.
yes, probably. So the Ishihara GX was a card designed by the Pokemon Company International, not designed by the Pokemon Company where Ishihara works. and they had a special birthday party for him at Worlds. Oh, I want to say 2018, could have been 2017. I'm struggling to think off the top of my head. Whenever his 60th birthday was, they had the party for him there, and they had printed up this card called Ishihara GX, which was a card of him. It was his face. It was him with some of his favorite Pokemon, I believe. And again, there'll be a photo on your screen right now. And I believe it was 242 copies total were printed. It was 2 printing sheets. That's some information that people have gotten from some people behind the scenes. Obviously, I don't have links or anything to back that up, but I trust the people who told me that information. He gave out a lot to people who were just at that party. This wasn't a full Pokemon staff party like you hear about at Worlds. Not everyone who was on staff at Worlds was invited. This was like higher-ups and VIPs. So it was people who were high up at the Pokemon Company, high up at the Pokemon Company International, and funnily enough, the actors from Detective Pikachu. Some of them had been at Worlds that year. They were doing a promotion for the movie, which was coming out. So Catherine Newton is the name I know off the top of my head. I know for definite she had one because she posted it on her Instagram at some point. And then a lot of the 242 copies, he was given a huge amount himself to take back to Japan and give out to his other colleagues and his other friends there. So of the ones that remained in the US, most of them were with employees of the Pokemon Company International. So I think it was a little while before he started to sell, because I think this kind of thing of, if you still work there, don't sell it. It's kind of a thing of like, oh, we can't officially say to you, don't sell this, but if you do it while you're working here, there's going to be a talk with you. We're going to pull you into a meeting. So I believe it was most likely after someone had left who had one, they started selling. It was something that was given to them, but given to them on the proviso of, don't let this out while you're still here. There was a very famous copy of it sold, which had been graded by PSA. And it was quite famous because the person who graded it also graded a couple of copies each of the Art Academy cards, which were competition-winning cards. And again, if you have them, probably the ones you have, I think you probably want those scheduled as well. I think you have all the English ones. But so there was a competition in Japan, which had 10 Japanese cards printed. We don't need to worry about those for this conversation. But then there was a European competition and a North American competition, which had 6 cards each. Most of them are in English. There's like one Spanish one, one French one German one, I think something else, one Portuguese maybe. But these had 100 copies each, given only to the winners, only to the original designer of that card. And the person who graded the Ishihara GX graded a couple of copies each of those cards as well, which you can tell by following the PSA certification numbers. They were graded in order. And it turned out that there was no way these had come from winners. At least some of them, winners had confirmed they still owned it, all 100 copies of theirs. So that's how you know for definite that these came from someone at Pokemon, because these were extra copies of those that never should have been given out. So that's the famous copy of the Ishihara GX that sold. I actually think it was Max Mofo, the YouTuber, that bought that one. And then a few more have sold in the years since.
Yeah, because I know that my understanding of, I thought you were talking about the Ishihara one that was graded a 10 and was sold, what came through collector's cash and Bayman, and was bought by the collector down in San Diego area who bought, or maybe not 100, was it 100,000 or a million? I don't even remember. It was some crazy number. So
I think the one I'm talking about went through collector's cash at the same time as the Art Academies, but I don't think it was a 10. So okay. I think collector's cash might have had a couple go through them at some point.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. And one of those Art Academies seems to still be more rare. It's got it's a Kyogre or something. Is that the one?
Yeah. So out of the 12 Art Academies, including the non-English ones that are in those 2 tournaments, there's 3 that are a lot rarer than any of the others. It's Kyogre and then 2 of the Pikachus. It's the Queen of Hearts Pikachu, and I don't remember which other Pikachu, but the illustrator names are Me and Ashley on the 2 Pikachus. And the reason that those are a lot rarer is that the winners have never been like publicly identified. So for all of the other cards, the other 9 cards, the winners were identified and they sold most of them. 8 of them sold a lot of copies basically straight away. The Mew, the winner who drew Mew, but that one's a German, you don't really need to worry about that. Sold them, but sold like one a month or one every 2 months and was slowly drip feeding them out. But those other 3, the winners have never shown up to sell their copies. And the reason that the Kyogre gets a bit more attention is that the winner of the Kyogre has been identified, whereas the Pikachu artists haven't. I mean, she has said that she never plans on selling any of them. She's still got the box that she got sealed, and she's publicly stated she wants to keep all 100 copies. She didn't even want the art being publicly shown. I suppose, the art was shown as part of the competition winning. She didn't want the actual card being shown. But so she was not too happy when these extra copies got out, to be honest. But that's why the Kyogre is a bit more expensive and a bit more desirable, because there are just less copies on the market. And even though the same is true of the 2 Pikachus, at any time, the winners of the Pikachus could find out that they have this card worth however much, and they could come and just put them all on the market. Or it could turn out that the winner of one of the Pikachus has just been selling privately all along, and then 100 collectors do already have this card, whereas we know it's 100% not a case with the Kyogre. We know that the 100 winning copies are still with the original winner.
Interesting. Wow. All right, what else, my friend? What else comes to mind? I think about those champion cards.
All the champion cards.
I don't see a single one for sale. I see finalist cards for if I see any finalist cards, very few. They're in the $15,000 range minimum. Yeah. And the only thing about champions, while there's more of those cards, they're probably more sought after than even the trophy cards, only because with people making their master sets, right? It gives them an opportunity to try to and maybe more and realize that these cards are out there as well. So
yeah, I don't know if they're overall more desirable, but I think they're a more achievable goal for some people. Yes. I think that people won't be saying I'd rather have the champion than have a trophy card, but a lot more people will be saying it's within my price range, budget, whatever, to get a champion card. I know I can't afford the trophy. So I think there are more people realistically going after the champion just because there's more people who can afford them. So obviously the early World's Champion ones are going to be high. The first World's Champion one was 2012. So the second version of Tropical Beach was the first one to have a champion. So that one will hold something special because it's the first champion. And then Worlds has had champion cards ever since. And Internationals, since they started with the double colorless energy, will all has champions, all of the different versions, the different events. Double colorless energy, the first time they did Internat was the only time so far that all 4 of them have been in English. So I think that one is probably a lot more desirable than any of the other international ones because there's the full range of 4 in English. And just again, with it being the first one, I know a lot of people go after that one. So I'm trying to think of what else there is about the champion cards. Oh, and the Professor Cup, which is happening at the moment this year, now has a champion card as well. Card called Friends in Galar from a set has a special Professor Program stamp on it, and that also has player staff top 8 champion versions. So that's another champion card, and that is one that Dave is still missing. So if you have a champion Friends in Galar or you have a staff Friends in Galar, also get in touch. Value-wise, that one is going to be a weird one because it was released so differently to any others. But for most champion cards, I would still say any champion card is still going to be worth less than the Finalist from 04 because the 2004 stamped cards from Worlds are still so much more sought after. But there are so many more people would really, really want those, and if they have the budget, would go for those over any champion.
Yeah, and I mean, essentially, the finalist card back then was the champion card because there was nothing higher, as you said, until 2012.
Yeah. And I know I've spoken to, again, to mention Chris Fullup, I've spoken to Chris, who still has one of his finalists, because you bought one, he still has the other. And he's told me the numbers he's been offered on it, and the numbers are way higher than any champion sales I've seen.
Okay, wow, that's good to know. Um, what's the number of champion cards typically? Just curiosity on that. When they
So
started coming out, how many of each would be in a particular year?
at Worlds, I believe it was 12, because each of the six winners got two copies each. So for there was a lot of worlds where players would get two full runs of like their place lower, but then there were some worlds where players would get two copies of their place and then one of everything lower. Um, so it started, but it was always you got two of your place at least. So there's always been 12 of each champion for those early years. And then when they started introducing other events, they introduced Pokken and Go and Unite. Players in those, if they won, they got a champion stamped card. They didn't get the trophy cards, so the number one, two, three, four still are TCG and VGC only. Obviously, starting with VGC from 2013, but the champion stamp cards were given to Pokken players. So I think there's two age divisions in Pokken. So the years that had Pokken, two more got out. In Go, I think this last year was the only time they had Go and Unite, but Go added two more copies, and Unite added five more copies because it's a five-player team. So there's a few more of those in the recent years, and then I believe for the internationals ones, it's just each player got one, so each international one has six copies of the champion. And then the Professor Cup, there's currently I think maybe four or five out there, but that number's still going up as they hold more Professor Cups throughout the year, because that one's not tied to a specific event. It's for like the yearly Professor Cup series.
Anything else? Anything else come to mind off the top of your head as far as I would
Uh,
call it? I know there's obviously going to be individual cards. So, and I'm going
yeah,
to lead that in hopefully into our next coffee talk.
yeah.
But because I have a question or an idea I want to, sort of discuss with you before we end.
Okay.
But inside of these sets, you can pick out, okay, well, there's a first edition Charizard, or there's a
Yeah,
holographic a Charizard crystal hollow, blah
yeah.
blah blah.
Within the set,
Or
it's
yes,
mainly
within the sets, or like the Gold Star hollows, those kind of things.
yeah. It's mainly going to be Charizards. It's going to be I mean, with first edition base, maybe the Blastoise and the Venusaur also get up there. I think when we see with stuff within sets, like you see huge price jumps in the grading. So if it's graded by PSA, CGC, whoever, the huge jumps in price come like between 9 and 10. So because your stuff isn't graded, it's not hitting the like ridiculous prices that some of these PSA 10 ones are. So it's a lot more. They're a lot closer and a lot more consistent within the sets. You won't get the one more popular thing going through the roof. But with that being said, still the most expensive stuff in the sets are going to be the Charizards. So your first edition base Charizard, Crystal Charizard, Shining Charizard. With gold stars, I think Rayquaza is at the top above Charizard because it came in a set that was a lot less printed than the set that had Charizard in it. So Rayquaza, Latios, the gold stars from Deoxys are some of the bigger ones. When you get out of the EX era, I don't think anything from Diamond and Pearl on, I don't think has any booster pack set cards that are that high. Like the level X's and stuff that you get in the Diamond and Pearl era, they're easy enough to obtain. Even recently, stuff like the Alt Art Umbreon, it's an expensive card, but it's nowhere near up. It's not up near that vintage stuff in terms of what it is in a set.
Okay. All right. I'm going to give you one more that just comes to my mind, because otherwise you won't be able to feed the dogs or wake them up. So we got to move on to something.
Yeah,
So
they won't.
what about the sample set? Because the sample set to me at one point looked like it was in the early days of my collecting, it looked more rare. And then in these past few years, I felt like it was more available. And now I can virtually see nothing about it. So
Yeah,
tell me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I wasn't even thinking of that one. Yeah, there's just so much stuff to go through. So yeah, the sample set was, and for people who don't know, sample set, I'll put a picture of one up here. They were cards created to demo how the e-reader worked. They were made for like promotional events where they brought people in to show off this new technology that the Game Boy Advance had. You could plug in this thing called an e-reader. You scanned the cards through. Anyone who's seen cards from like Expedition, Aquapolis, that sort of thing, they have dots on. You swipe them. Something shows up on your Game Boy screen. That's what that dot stuff is for. So these cards were made up and they look like cards from Expedition, except they have Japanese backs and they have the word sample printed on the bottom. Now, there are also two cards which have Japanese backs but don't have sample print on the bottom, a Hoppip and a Pichu. Those ones are a bit more common. Those ones were made and given out to attendees at like quite a big public event. The sample cards were made just for a very private industry-only event. And interesting story behind them, TPCI, or whatever they were called at the time, Pokemon Company International, made these without telling Wizards of the Coast, who owned the exclusive rights to make Pokemon cards at the time. The Hoppip and Pichu for the big event were cleared. These sample cards were not, so Wizards of the Coast were not happy about these. It's estimated, just from, again, talking to people who worked there at the time or know what the new people, somewhere between probably about 90 and 100 sets were printed, and about half of those were given out to people at this industry event. And interestingly, the ones that were given out at the industry event are not the ones we're seeing, because they were, you're giving it out to someone who works at a newspaper. You're not giving it out to someone who knows Pokemon. They're going to swipe it, they're going to damage it a few times, they're probably going to throw them away. Almost every sample card that we see in collections or on the market or anything now came from those extra ones that were held at Pokemon and weren't actually given out. I mean, I know my personal set I got from a guy on eBay who he had one complete set and then like 2 or 3 of most of the others. He only had one Pikachu, which I luckily got. And he said, we asked him where they came from, and he told me the basic story and then said, yeah, I used to work for Pokemon, and just when I left, I took a box of stuff, and that's where he got them from. So there weren't very many on the market when they were first, a thing that, when that press event happened, not very many hit the market straight away. It was only after, again, people at Pokemon who had them started leaving, they started selling, and a lot of them did hit the market for a while because a lot of people were, leaving, and after they see this one guy put all of his on there and they get some decent prices, you see them a little bit more, and then just as they get absorbed into collections, we haven't seen many of them lately because the people who have them now want them. They got bought up by the people who were keeping them, basically, is why we haven't seen them. That's why, again, there was that big surge for a little while. But those are, again, that's one where if you could list the set, it definitely would go into the singularity on the insurance. But individual cards, it's going to depend on where your, basically insurance price point is. Because the Pikachu is pretty high, at least. The others are a little bit lower. I haven't seen any big sales lately, especially on raw cards. It's just, again, there's been a couple of highly graded ones that have gone quite high, but it's just it's one we can look into if you need to list them individually, but we're just going to have to wait for some more sales, I think, to try and establish a price point on that one.
Okay. All right. Well, listen, as always, I appreciate all the information. I'm sure that if I were looking at my list, I'd find a couple more things, but it gives me a good starting point. Yeah, so I at least can get to a point where I've make some headway on this.
Yeah.
One question I don't know, and I'll have to ask the insurance company, is: are you literally listing an individual card, or as you just spoke about, could you be possibly listing an entire set as an individual item?
Yeah.
And keeping that in mind, I want to tell you something that I want to see if you might think about for our next talk. Okay. So here's what it is. I have these sets, and a lot of these complete master sets from vintage through EX era and those kinds of things, there are no similar items for me to compare pricing against. So let's say I really want to ensure the collection, list everything, and make sure that I'm protected against anything. And I don't want to leave anything out. So essentially, you're going through an appraisal process.
Yeah.
The problem is that if you picked, when I looked yesterday, I think the only set I saw out there that might be comparable, I think I saw a legendary set on eBay for about 70,000 or something.
Right.
Now, with every card in a similar kind of condition, because a lot of the folks that list out there, they're LP or MP or HP, and my stuff has been built for multiple sets going together to make one truly 8-9, if it were to be graded, minimum level grading type set. So if you looked at Fire Red Leaf Green, or you picked out any set, just as an example, 99% of any sets out there that would even be available never have the reverse hollows. They call them complete sets without them. And I have, of course, complete sets and need to know how to value them in some
Yeah.
realistic fashion, based on the fact of not only the condition, but the completeness and also the variants that are inside. So here's what I'm thinking, what I started to think about yesterday, and maybe we can then expand upon this next time. Is it possible to create a kind of mathematical formula, okay, that would say, for example, and let's make it in its most simplistic form. The value of a set is 1/2 of the value of a booster box. Now, I know this is not, we can't do that, but I
Yeah.
just want to give an example. So we say, okay, a set is generally equal to at least minimum value 1/2 of a booster box. But then do we then need to say, okay, but here are the variables that change that. Unless the set has this, and we need to do this. Unless the set has this, we need to do this. And then the set has a Charizard, we need to add another, type of additional kind of value point. So I know that there's not, I know there's not a simple way to do this,
Yeah.
but it's of interest to me to try to figure out, or do you build it from, do you reverse engineer it and say, we're going to go through every PSA 8 or near mint card or whatever that's out there of the higher value cards in the set, and we're going to then build it piece by piece, using the top value regular hollow cards and the top value reverse hollow cards, but then there's a value to every reverse hollow card, because to buy that box and try to break it up, you're not going to get a full set out of it.
Yeah. It probably is ending up being where you'd have to go through. I mean, raw near mint cards like you have probably are close to around PSA 8 in value. So you'd probably be looking stuff around that. You'd either have to try and find comparable sales for each card or for PSA 8s of each card. I don't think there's any sort of formula, because just different sets are so weird. And then there's some sets where there's not that much of value in the set, but the sealed product is really, really high. That just any sort of formula, I think, would end up falling apart on a lot of sets.
Yeah,
So
and my interest in the formula wouldn't be for complete accuracy. It'd be for minimum valuation, so that somebody says, "Hey, David, you have an extra, again, legendary set, but that's not a good example. But you have an extra Delta species set. I would like to buy it. It's near mint to mint. What would I charge them?" That's the question, and trying to figure out a way that might be helpful to everybody that might have a set someday they want to sell, as opposed to just putting a random value on it, that there's more of a kind of tied to a value that sort of is more well known or well recognized. I mean, I know it's purely a
yeah,
theoretical conversation, but
yeah, it does seem like a little bit of a pipe dream to have just the go-to thing. It is going to, I think, end up always being more about the individual cards and going through and sorting out the prices of each of those cards, rather than comparing to any sort of sealed stuff or working off anything like that. Like, even for minimum values, it's always going to be better just actually going by the recent sales of the actual cards themselves and piecing it by, like, just basically adding it up.
you don't think by giving me this answer, though, you're just purely taking the easy way out? Instead of you saying, David, I can help you with all these previous sales and stuff, you don't think just by saying you have to do this all by we can't do it formulaically, I'm taking the easy way out, David. I don't want to help you.
If there was a way to do it, I'd be up for trying to do it, but I just think there's so much variation between sets that even coming in at a minimum price, trying to base it on, how it is based compared to booster box cost, I think it's just too wildly off that I think it wouldn't be a good answer for either seller or buyer.
Okay. All right. Well, you're entitled to your opinion, whether or not I do or don't agree. Dan, now that we've completed today's discussion, I would like to ask you a question I hadn't anticipated, but we've had a lengthy conversation about scheduling and ensuring collections, with the realization that, at least for my personal circumstances, it doesn't seem to be an extremely costly situation. It seems reasonable.
Yeah.
So has any of our discussion prompted you to personally to maybe want to make a call or two for you and Laura and research looking at potentially insuring your own collections?
I've been meaning to do that for a while. Laura's been getting on at me about getting the collection insured.
Okay, good.
We did have it insured for a while back before the prices shut up, because back then we did just have like a blanket coverage insurance on it. But now they're saying, most places are saying, okay, we need you to list basically everything individually. So I need to go through and I need to figure out exactly what needs to be singled out and what can be blanket. I do need to do it, but I just haven't yet.
Well, good for you. I'm glad that I could be helpful in at least a suggestion. And maybe some of the other folks out there that have been listening today will think about that as well, just because for their own protection, every time I think that I'm, doing well, potentially financially, not intended to do so because of the collection, I'm still collecting and loving every minute of it. Wish I could spend more time. But then my wife will say something like, you know what? And when the fire hits, and then of course I get sick to my stomach, go in and throw up, lie down for 3 days and realize I've got a lot more to think about. So, yeah.
Yeah. There's always that extra worry.
Yes. Well, there's always something. So, all right, my friend. Well, I'm going to say thank you because I have to go schedule some items. What else to do on a wonderful Sunday? But I want to say I appreciate you having me on your podcast. Hopefully it will be a regular thing now, our little coffee talk, even though you seem to drink only water. And Pikachu is here with me and Psyduck are here. They're my bodyguards in case you had an attitude shift or something I wasn't comfortable with. I needed some support.
Yeah, for the next one, I'll maybe bring in some bodyguards of my own. I'll have to bring them through.
Okay, fair enough. They're going to be either dogs or Pokemon characters. I'm not sure which. So
I have some of the plush about the same size as that one. We'll try and
fair enough. Show off. Okay, my friend. All right, listen, I'll keep your casino seat warm and and we'll look to talk to you again very soon, all right?
Yeah, good chat as always. Hopefully we can get this in next week as well.
Okay, my friend. You take care.
You too.
Okay, bye.
All right, well, that was first of hopefully many videos with David. Hopefully you did all enjoy. If you have any questions for me or for David about anything we talked about in this video, or just about anything Pokemon related, leave them in the comments and we will hopefully go through them in the next one that we do and try and get some of those answered. But as always, thanks for watching and I'll see you next time. I would like to say a huge thank you to everyone who chooses to support me on Patreon. If you'd like to get involved, help support the channel and see some behind the scenes content, click on the link in the description. Thanks again.
Thanks for watching. Check out some more videos right here.
And don't forget to subscribe for more awesome Pokemon content from DJ Gigabyte.
Gotta catch 'em all!